see you. If you stop being stupid.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, last time we ended up looking at, came to the conclusion that a lot of plants in the ocean look quite a lot like animals, and quite a lot of the animals in the ocean look quite a lot like plants, and it is a bit confusing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, I've got here an example of a sponge. All right. Now, a sponge is actually an animal. Well, you've seen SpongeBob, haven't you?
Yeah.
Now, a sponge is actually a colony. It's a colony of animals all living basically in a big apartment block. And they've all got little windows, beautiful sea views, and they suck seawater in. They process it to get the oxygen out and the food, and then they squirt it out of these little chimneys at the top here. And so there you go. Which makes sense, doesn't it? Why not? Live in an apartment block. Apartment living, it's fine. Now, it does mean that they look a little bit like plants. And of course, corals look a bit like plants too. Now, corals don't just suck water in, they actually have little stingers which they fire out and actually sting little bits of plankton and pull them in, which means that you can actually get stung by some corals, which is not so good.
I'm glad I don't like salads. Sure.
Of course, they're not plants. They're animals. They look like plants, but they're not. So you just got to remember that old soak, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyway, I'm sort of thinking of not plant-like. Seaweeds are not very plant-like sometimes. Now, a plant we know about on land would have roots, puts it down to get water and nutrients from the ground. That will maybe produce flowers, maybe produce seeds, and there's your plant. It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in the ocean, seaweeds don't do any of that. They don't tend to put down roots because actually when you're surrounded by water and you're surrounded by nutrients, why do you need roots? And if you don't need roots, why do you need to stay in one place? So a lot of plants in the ocean actually move. Yeah, I know, it's weird, isn't it? So they move around the place. Now, of course, having seeds again is a bit tricky in the ocean, and you can't really have an underwater flower. It's sort of in pollen and all that stuff. It doesn't work. So a lot of plants have their own version of eggs and sperm, which really is much more animal-like. So, yeah. So kind of your definitions of what's a plant and what's an animal, it kind of gets a little bit vague when you get into the ocean. So we tend to talk about producers, which are organisms which produce food, sugars from photosynthesis from the sun. Do we call them plants? Probably a good marine biologist would try not to call them a plant because they're not really very plant-like sometimes. Yeah, it is. It's really confusing. So, but of course, most of the plants out in the ocean are absolutely microscopic. They are tiny, just so small you'd need a pretty good microscope to see them. Well, most of us don't, so most of us don't get to see them very much. But you can sometimes tell that they're there because you might be down at the beach and you'll see a whole lot of foam washing up, being blown out of the water, flowing up over the beach, being blown along by the wind. Now, of course, what's happening is that those little tiny cells of a plant in the ocean often contain tiny droplets of oil. Now, the oil, of course, floats, keeps them near the surface. That's where the sun is. Makes sense. Good place to be. And but then they get smashed onto the beach. They get mixed with water. You get what I often call a sort of oceanic salad dressing. And so that's where the oil and the water mixing together, they form this foam and it gets blown around the place. People often think it's pollution. Well, it doesn't really. It's actually a sign of life. If you've got lots of phytoplankton, you're going to get a lot of other things. And of course, just about everything in the ocean relies on plankton. Yep.
Not shags.
I wouldn't be so sure about that, Soak. I think you might find that shags depend on phytoplankton and plankton as well. So, yeah, maybe we'll talk about that next time, eh?
What? No.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
See ya.